This RealAg Radio episode podcast is brought to you by high-performing carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide delivers fast, selective, and extended control of aphids in alfalfa and pulses, leaving beneficials like lady beetles to help in the fight. Ask your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/ca today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of RealAg Radio's Agronomic Monday here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Monday, April 7th, and I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. I've got a fantastic show for you. We're going to talk planter prep. At the end of the show, we're going to talk about going after gigantic soybean yields right off the hop. We're also going to check in with Greg Bartley with Pulse Canada on the Keep It Clean campaign. And you've likely heard of this by now, especially if you're in Western Canada. The Keep It Clean campaign is between the Canola Council of Canada, Pulse Canada, and Cereals Canada. Those three groups have gotten together, and each year they put out essentially a product advisory to say which products, even if registered, potentially, may not be a fit for the crop you want to use it on based on either market access, perhaps an MRL issue, etc. And so this is one of those important things that really you need to take a look at and double check, because even though something may have an approved label use, some markets may not accept that crop if it's been treated with a particular crop protection product. So keep that in mind. It does cover several different crop types. And so Greg Bartley, as I said, he's going to join me later in the show to unpack some of the new items that are on there, and of course just what to take note of, and to let you know about a webinar coming up that digs a little bit deeper into the Keep It Clean campaign and all the different products that are on there. So check that out. We've also got on today's show, we've got a product spotlight with Jason Mann with Genesis Fertilizers. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Arctic Gateway Group collaboration with Genesis Fertilizers. But as I mentioned, that's right, you're going to hear about soybeans and going after 100 bushels per acre plus. Horst Bohner with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, and Shaun Casteel with Purdue University. We're on the kickoff episode of this year's Soybean School, and they break it down, talk about all the nutrients needed and some of those management decisions that are really important if you're going after those big yields. I don't know about you, but we're finally well into April, but not well into spring. And I sort of want to touch on that for just a moment. A few things in today's open, a few news items to cover. If you've been under a rock today, that's probably the safest place. Markets have been an absolute bloodbath. And I'm saying that, that might be an understatement, to be entirely honest. Just so much volatility today following the U.S. president's announcements last week on global tariffs. Overnight markets were way down. The daytime, there was a blip in social media earlier based on an older, and when I say older, I mean like a 2-hour-old interview. It is just chaos. And I know that there are people probably making money on all this because, of course, one person's pain is another person's opportunity. I get it. But I think ultimately, your average person is losing out here, especially if you have any sort of investments. And let's face it, that's just the market. The market is a reflection of all sorts of different economic, sentiment, and where investments will go, et cetera. So I will tell you, deep breath, honestly. Watching the news last week, even through this weekend, I made a point of heading outside and just unplugging for a little while, which I think is really important. And I had a conversation about, one of the things I'm really thankful for working in agriculture and don't get me wrong, there is stress and uncertainty, and we have to manage, the unknown when it comes to weather, and we've got pests coming at us, and we're at the mercy of global markets for pricing at times, and all of those things. Yes, that is all true. But one of the things that I find actually really comforting about agriculture and about food production is the cycle of nature, that nothing the U.S. president can announce will stop. And I know that seems, let me unpack this a bit. It is getting warmer. The soil is warming up. The snow is disappearing. The days are getting longer. We will put a crop in the ground. I will have lambs arriving in about a month on the ground. Nature just keeps going. And that means food production just keeps going. And so as much as there is just so much uncertainty and so much volatility in the markets, in trade, we're in an election right now, and that's all over the place. There is something just so incredibly comforting about biology continuing. And if I may, this is one of those, what can we do about, an absolute stock market meltdown? We talked about this on Friday's show about, you can take some risk off the table. You don't have to be invested in these. You could, put your money elsewhere. That's assuming you've got any extra. But one of the things I just find really, really as just a support for the mundane of just the everyday, that no matter what happens, we're still going to put a crop in the ground. I know maybe that crop is not going to be the most profitable we've ever had, and I'm not saying it makes all the stress and strain of everything else go away, but there is something just so, like yesterday, I went outside, I sat with our ewe lambs that are in a bale grazing setup right now. They're due to lamb in about 6 to 8 weeks, and I was just so comforted by the fact that some things just keep going. They don't have any sense of what's happening in the outside world. They are just growing their lambs, and by this fall, they're going to be feeding families, and it just keeps going. And I found that just incredibly uplifting this weekend. So I would love for your feedback. And actually, shout out to Chad, who listened to Friday's show, but on Sunday. So he's in, it's technically Eastern Ontario. It's kind of not, but he's near, let's say, Lyndsey, Peterborough area. Just got power back on Saturday or Sunday. So remember on Friday's show, I said, hey, there's still some farmers that, just got power back. Oh no, there were still thousands without power from last week's ice storm, Chad being one of them. But shout out, Chad. Thank you so much for listening to the show on Sunday when you did have power, and letting us know that you were now okay, but you were still certainly without power. I hope that for things like this, when we're dealing with weather, when we're dealing with, the market volatility, that it's really great just to chat with each other, to reach out, to listen, and spend some time outside with the changing of seasons. To me, that is what's keeping me sort of level-headed through all of this. Because let me tell you, there is some days in the last few weeks where, if I could have just moved to the woods, a cabin in the woods, and just stayed there till all this blew over, I would. But guess what? We don't have that luxury. Although, hey, if you've got a cabin in the woods, invite me. I love playing card games. I am really good company around a fire at night. Give me a dingle. Okay. Back to a few other things I wanted to cover. Of course, we do have this week, we'll have our regular Farmer Rapid Fire coming up on Thursday. I'm going to be hosting, which is awesome. But tonight, as always, we've got the Agronomists. So I host this show every Monday night. It's prime time, so it's 8 p.m. Eastern, so that's 6 p.m. Mountain Time. It goes live on our YouTube feed, Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course at realagriculture.com/agronomists. Tonight, we're going to talk about terminating cover crops. And we are going to focus on spring termination of cover crops because, of course, that's what we're heading into. And I've got Jake Monroe lined up. Now, he's with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness. And he's got some really cool research that he's going to share that he's done here in Ontario that looks at the pros and cons of waiting to terminate a cover crop. And people might say, well, like, obviously we want to terminate it, as late as possible because we want to get those benefits of that living root system. And that's true, except for that depending on which crop you are planning to seed or plant into it, and depending on what your moisture situation is, that can sometimes actually work against you. But it all sort of depends on what kind of cover crop you're growing, what kind of crop you're going to grow after, and all of those sorts of factors. So Jake's going to share that. We've got Jim McComb is joining me as well. He's here in Ontario. And Kevin Elmy of Cover Crops Canada. He's going to join the show. So a full lineup tonight. Super excited. It also does qualify as a knowledge sharing event. If you're in Ontario and you are looking for that KSE, it does qualify. So join us. That's tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern. And of course, every Monday. We have it, except for holiday Mondays. Oh, and except for next week, because, hey, super exciting. The Real Agriculture team is actually getting together in person all across Canada. We're going to meet in Toronto. We're going to go to a Jays game on Monday, which I cannot wait for. It's so exciting. Mostly it's for the food, I'll be honest, but also for the company and a little bit for the game. All right. So, check that out tonight and let us know if you watch. Would love to hear from you. With that, let's take a quick break. I'm probably way over time. I apologize profusely. I'll be back with a discussion on maximum soybean yield right after this.
We got some exciting news. We have a new episode of the Pest and Predators podcast that's going to be starting here very shortly. Joined right now to chat all about it, the University of Alberta PhD student, Rachel Pazante. You know, we've been doing the Pest and Predator podcast for a number of years now, but from your perspective, how would you explain it to the listener?
This is a chance for researchers to share their research, what they've been working on, with a broader audience and with the people who might actually benefit from the research.
What does the audience have to look forward to in season 6 of Pest and Predators?
Well, my episode, we're going to talk about hoverflies, as well as other beneficial insects that live in field borders surrounding canola fields.
It's kind of fascinating because we talk a lot about getting inside the canopy, and we talk a lot about beneficials. But I think a lot of times we think about the crop, think about the pest, we don't necessarily think about the whole ecosystem. That's the Pest and Predator podcast, powered by WGRF. Those episodes are going to be coming out here very shortly. We'll be talking about them here on RealAgriculture.com.
Every seed starts a story at Alliance Seed. A seed holds the promise of successful harvest each year, from the first day of planting as your crop grows and navigates the challenges of weather, to the final load from the last field. It all begins with the seed you choose. Trust Alliance Seed to guide your choices by providing the expertise and information needed to match the right seed to your farm's unique potential. Start your success story with cereal and pulse varieties by visiting allianceseed.com.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith. And you know what? I should probably let everybody know. You'll probably remember that a few weeks ago, we switched it up. Tuesdays with Lyndsey became Lyndsey hosting Agronomic Monday. Shaun's going to take on Tuesdays. And we tried it out for about 6 weeks, and I think we're going to stick with it. So, hey, let us know if you like the switch or if you missed Tuesdays with Lyndsey. I highly doubt it. Probably no one noticed. Anyway, but here we are, back on Monday, and I'm going to be here for a little while. This segment brought to you by CCIA's online web store. If you need livestock tags, get them fast and hassle-free through CCIA's online web store. Shop approved tags for beef cattle and pre-approved tags for goats and cervids. There's a variety of options all in one place. You can order online 24/7 by visiting tags.canadaid.ca, your trusted source for traceability. All right, for this next segment, hats off to Horst Bohner and Shaun Casteel. So Shaun Casteel's with Purdue University. Horst Bohner is our soybean specialist here for the province of Ontario. These two gentlemen did just a fantastic job at the Ontario Ag Conference earlier this year, talking about the recipe for 100 bushel beans, those triple-digit yield potential that we're all just absolutely hoping for. Can we get there? Well, yes, potentially. But there's more than a few things that go into the mix on getting those really amazing soybean yields. Some of them are, of course, management decisions like planting depth, planting date, row spacing, etc. But there's always that nutrient question. And so in this interview that Bern Tobin, of course, brings you from the Soybean School with Horst and Shaun, talking about all the different decisions that have to be made that really contribute to the potential, at least, for triple-digit soybean yield.
We've had real interest in the session of 100 bushel beans, and I know you guys down in Indiana have had some of those incredible yields, and so have we, fortunately, in Ontario, just in plots here and there. But so let's talk about 100 bushel beans, and maybe a good place to start is the foundations of what it takes. You know, what should every grower think about?
Yeah, no doubt. Foundations have to be the place where you start, right? If you're building a house right on the sand versus the rock, which one's really going to stand the test of time is what we're talking about. And so I think certainly when we look at foundational management aspects of soybeans, it's got to be variety selection. So you got to have the varieties that have got the yield potential, yield consistency, and whether you have disease packages that you need to worry about, whether you have white mold that's in the area or a soybean cyst nematode, those are certainly the ones that you need to start with. Planting dates are the next one on my list. They're huge, right? Growing up in the Midwest, I grew up in Illinois, and growing up is you plant the soybeans whenever you're done with the corn, and that mentality's changed. I think we've proven that over and over. I think you guys have seen the same thing, that we've got to plant these beans timely. It's late April, early May in general, and we can even go beyond that to get some real good yield advantages there. Now, are you seeing similar things up here?
We certainly are. In our data set, we had a nice steady 3-year study across the province, and we were surprised at how big the differences were with that first window when we could plant. So sometimes it was late April, sometimes early May, and then mid-May, and then mid-June, and we lost up to 25% yield potential 25%. By going all the way to June.
Sure, yeah.
But even that kind of normal versus the first window, easily losing 10% or more. And you showed some good data with where farmers have gone on this as well,
doubt.
Right?
Yeah, so within Indiana, I mean, we've been marching down this road of planting timely, planting soybeans first, and you get that other crop, that diva crop, I mean, corn, it needs to have perfect conditions. I give all the corn agronomists a hard time. Right. Soybeans can withstand a lot of variability. I'm not saying just slap them in open seed slats, right, because it's April 25th. Field conditions still need to be fit, but within Indiana, back in about 2018, we saw a marked change, right? We were typically 2 weeks after corn planting at the state level. Then we switched to 5 or 7 days, and then now we're within the same days, 1 or 2, or even first. So yeah, we've seen that change, and with that, it's not saying it's all of it, but we have broken state record yields in 2018, 2020, 21, 23, high planting progress years.
Yeah, and you're really attributing at least a good portion of that to that early planting.
Yeah, the early planting, and what it's doing, right? It's a crop. We're going indeterminates like you guys are, and they're developing because of photoperiod and heat units. So we plant a little bit earlier. We get a nice compact plant. We have the opportunity for more node development, those trifoliate nodes and attachment points, and even some reproductive branches. So all that's coming together with good yield potential.
Yeah. So where do you guys stand in terms of picking the right maturity group? Because in Ontario here, we're presently updating our maturity zone map. And it's quite interesting to do that. We're learning that it depends where you are in the province. It has more to do with what's adapted for maximum yield, not just growing
the fullest season.
The longest.
Right.
Is that the same
Yeah,
thing?
we're seeing the same trend. I think a lot of us have been, the agronomy 101s that we all took was, let's go ahead and plant the full season to get the full yield potential because of reproductive duration. And it kind of makes sense logically, but boy, there's some yield potentials that are totally different, at least in these recent years, of let's say like a mid-group 3 versus our full season 3s. And I'm doing just as well with some early 3s because I think they got yield potential in addition to this planting date that we're putting into context.
So we've hit on 2 good points. Now let's skip right to this idea of what more intensive managers should do. Like, what are some recipes? You've done some excellent work around sulphur. Give us the sulphur story. And
how much time do we have
exactly.
here?
I mean, you've done some really good work there. So.
Yeah, sulphur. So this one's been a fun one. You even made this comment in our presentation that never would you think of one treatment where you would see double digits, let alone 20 bushel numbers in soybeans from one treatment.
Oh, it's amazing.
And so within this, so I think the understanding what sulfur is doing. All right, sulfur is needed. It's a macronutrient. All crops need it. Soybeans a little bit unique when you compare it to a grass crop in terms of we need the sulfur for a cofactor for nodulation. So in other words, if we don't have a good sulfur supply, we don't have a good nodulation and fixation. So we don't have a good nitrogen supply. If you're sold short on nitrogen in soybeans, you're sold short on yield in a major way. And so sulfur has been a big thing for us in the last probably 5 or 7 years. There's going to be fields that are going to see it no matter what. The classic sandy fields, coarse textures, less than 2% organic matter. But I also have fields that are as flat and black as this table, 4% organic matter, that we're getting sizable yield differences.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And you've made the comment that maybe with the earlier planting, more of a response?
Yeah, and so I've got some fun studies that we've gotten into this, that we're planting timely, late April, early May, and then we'll go all the way to the Junes like we do on a typical good agronomist planting date study. But we've mixed it with the sulfur treatments, and the ones that are on the earlier side are responding well. We've got years that we're averaging 8 to 11 bushels on prairie soil. I've got individual years that I'm hitting the 20, 22 bushel mark. Like last year, it went from 77 bushel beans to 99 and 100.
Wow.
And this year we are 11 bushel response on those fields. So I'm attributing a lot of that. We are planting earlier, and in that, where do we get sulfur? It's not from the atmosphere anymore. If we get it from this black soil, well, it takes microbes to do that, and they need good temperatures, to get that mineralization occurring. So if we're pushing late April, so early May, cooler conditions, that mineralization really isn't occurring. So we need that sulfur early. A nice fertilizer treatment's playing well for us.
So you also made the comment that there are some disease interactions that because you're chasing this every year, and you've learned some new things around sudden death.
Oh, that one was fascinating, right? Again, you do something, you hope that something hits, and boy, something's hit within this. So back in 2023, one of my trials, we had SDS that was coming in, and we started looking, and so foliar symptomology is like, that one looks totally different. And so I started rating it, and this was a trial that we planned in early May. We had good conditions for SDS development, right? You think about cool, wet conditions during early vegetative growth. Well, we had that. And then that disease development, I call it our state fair disease. A state fair for us is in August, and so whenever that disease actually shows up in the leaves, and so that symptomology, the intraveinochlorosis, and we had a marked substantial reduction in SDS, those that had the sulfur treatment. So that was in 23. Last year in 24, I worked with Darcy Talenko on the pathology side of this, and so we actually had planting dates and different sulfur treatments as well as SDS inoculant, and we're seeing it again. And so beyond the fertility effect, beyond the fixation boosting capacity that comes with this, there is some evidence that we have some disease control or suppression. Right now, I'll use that loosely because a couple years worth of data, but if you really think about the first fungicides on the market 100 years ago, they were a sulfur base. So it's not too surprising that we might be seeing something here.
Yeah. So I feel like I should at least mention the Ontario data. And so, because, of course, we've been working on the sulfur stuff as well. So I pulled together 35 site years since 2019. And when we put down 100 pounds of ammonium sulfate, we got 3 bushel average response, which is actually pretty exciting because previously when we did the work, we really didn't have much of it.
Right.
But the intriguing part was we had some specific sites where we had a tremendous result, and one site that Mazex did this year, 27 bushel response.
That's outstanding.
I've never seen that in my life in terms of one input. Awesome.
Yeah.
But we have to keep in mind that it is a site specific. That was a sandy soil. But lots to learn on the sulfur front. I'm with you on that. It's kind of it's an exciting thing to study.
It's fun, right? It's fun to come talk with you, to talk with others. Say we've got some treatments out there that are providing hope, promise, right? Not just an extension guy saying don't do it. It doesn't work. Don't do it. It's a 2 bushel response. It doesn't break even, right? So it is fun to have that.
Well, awesome. And again, thank you for coming up and sharing your information with us. It's been fun.
It is always a great time to come up here. So thank you for your time.
Big thank you to Horst Bohner with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, and of course Shaun Casteel with Purdue University joining us here on RealAg Radio. We're going to take a quick break, and I'll be back with more right after this.
Right now, People in agriculture and food are facing challenges that can feel overwhelming. If you need to talk, access the National Farm Crisis Line at 1-866-FARMS-01. That's 1-866-327-6701. It's 24/7 confidential help when you need it. Farm Credit Canada also has tools to support your long-term mental health. Learn more and access the crisis line at fcc.ca/wellness.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. My name is Lyndsey Smith, and it is time for today's Product Spotlight. Joining me now is Jason Mann. He's the president of Genesis Fertilizers. Now, Jason, let's talk about how the Arctic Gateway Group and Genesis Fertilizers, how working together is really helping to hedge Genesis Fertilizers against some of the trade uncertainty that's out there. I mean, certainly the tariff climate with the U.S. creates a lot of that uncertainty.
Right. So again, if we come up with a supply chain that's outside of North America for our phosphate, presumably we would bypass this tariff threat, first of all. So we don't know what's going to happen with tariffs. We don't know if it's going to be 25%, is it 10%, is it nothing? We don't know. So I think it's just good. Optionality is always good. So more players at the table offering phosphate, it means more competition and presumably a lower price for your phosphate. You know, as far as supply chain, if we build our own supply chain with our own, collaborating with Arctic Gateway Group to have facilities at the Port of Churchill that are dedicated to bringing in phosphate, now we control our own supply chain. We're not reliant on another provider to get the product into Western Canada. Farmers can take that into their own hands, and we can, purchase in advance, bring the product in ahead of the season, and make sure that we have the quantities we need when we need it.
Mm-hmm. Now, can you share then, sort of to put this all together, how the Arctic Gateway Group aligns with Genesis Fertilizers' broader vision, specifically when we're talking about exactly that, the Belle Plaine nitrogen facility and the Supercenter distribution network?
Mm-hmm. Well, for Port of Churchill and Arctic Gateway Group, they want to put more traffic through this port, and it should be utilized more. It's a shame that the port has got into the way it has. So, getting more throughput, whether it's agriculture commodities or all of these wonderful natural resources we have that we should be figuring out how to get out of the country. Churchill just has to be utilized more, and we're seeing quite a spotlight there now with the federal election. That it's nice to see that both major parties are talking about Churchill. It's good, and there's a lot of talk about our north and northern sovereignty and all those other good things. So anything that we can do to support Churchill that makes sense, we would like to do, and likewise with Arctic Gateway Group, because their group is a community of Indigenous communities, right? And they kind of look at what we're doing with ours being a grassroots project with thousands of farmers across Western Canada. There's alignment there. These are grassroots projects to strengthen our supply chain and our production in Western Canada. So there's a lot of alignment there, and utilizing their infrastructure at Churchill and the railroad. They're looking for, well, if we bring fertilizer in, maybe we can find a way to get grain out through Churchill again.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jason, we of course have had members of your team of Genesis Fertilizers on many times to talk about this project. Where can people go if they've still got questions, or if they, of course, want to invest and become involved?
Well, the best is always go to the website, genesisfertilizers.com. There's a toll-free number there. There's a query where you can put in your name and somebody will get back to you. That's usually the best. We have a team of dealing representatives that are out in the country talking to farmers every day. I was in just south of Winnipeg yesterday and had a nice meeting with a really great group of Hutterite colonies. We had about 10 colonies in the room. Lots of excitement, lots of good questions. And it's even though we're out on the airwaves and doing a lot of promotion, there's still lots of farmers that just aren't that familiar with the project yet. And boy, once they really dig into it and understand what we're doing, it creates a lot of excitement and momentum.
All right. Jason Mann, president of Genesis Fertilizers. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you, Lyndsey.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Find everything you need for outstanding weed control in your wheat and barley from the cross-spectrum herbicide experts at Corteva. Corteva is proud to offer a wide selection of cross-spectrum herbicides for maximum convenience, effective resistance management, and customized control of your toughest grassy and broadleaf weeds. No matter what kind of weed challenges you're experiencing, we've got the right fit for your farm. Visit corteva.ca to learn more.
At Vaterstad, we aim to be the world's leading partner for outstanding emergence. We're doing that through innovative tillage, planting, and seeding equipment that's optimized for your field conditions and soil types. We also offer industry-leading capacities to help you get the job done in shorter windows of time. It's all designed to give your crop the best start possible so you can maximize yields. Vaterstad, we look forward to growing together.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. This segment is brought to you by FP Genetics. FP Genetics brings new seed genetics to Canadian farms, empowering growers to thrive in ever-changing conditions. Visit fpgenetics.ca and join thousands of Canadian growers who trust FP Genetics to deliver innovative, reliable seed genetics season after season. Experience the next wave at fpgenetics.ca. Welcome back to RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com. I am Lyndsey Smith, and joining me now is Greg Bartley. He's the Director for Crop Protection and Crop Quality with Pulse Canada. Welcome here, Greg.
Hey, Lyndsey.
Well, one of these days, it's going to be spring, and we are going to get a crop in the ground, and it's going to be great. However, that is going to mean that we need to make decisions about crop protection products at some point. And Pulse Canada is part of the team that brings us the Keep It Clean program. So let's start there, Greg. What is the Keep It Clean program? And then let's talk about why it matters.
Sure. The Keep It Clean program, it's a joint initiative between the Canola Council of Canada, Pulse Canada, and Cereals Canada. And it's simply meant to be a communication tool to communicate the things that farmers and industry need to know to produce market-ready crops. So that's agronomic practices. It could be crop protection, pesticides, things like that may pose a market risk, but could also get into plant diseases and quality issues and certain varieties, things like that. So trying to strip down all of the potential market access barriers and put it into a nice, simple information to communicate only what people need to know in terms of how to make sure that we retain market access into these export markets based on our on-farm practices.
And now it covers several crops, obviously, because as you said, Canola Council, Cereals Canada, Pulse Canada, all involved in this initiative. There is a fantastic website and web tool that farmers can access to go through and look by crop type. Is there anything on the list this year that is new and noteworthy? And then let's talk about some of those that are kind of always on there. But what's new and noteworthy for this growing season?
Yeah, so one of the tools that we do put out is we call it the Keep It Clean Product Advisory, and that's exactly it, trying to communicate the pesticide products that, are registered for use here in Canada, but could still cause market access issues in those export markets. So it's a list that we don't want to put together. Our preference would be not to be doing this, so we try and keep it as short as possible and only communicate those that you need to be aware of. But yeah, there are a couple things that you definitely need to keep an eye out for. So from a Pulse Canada perspective or a Pulse perspective, there's a new one. We are communicating the product, the active ingredients, flunicimid. So this is, the trade name's Carbine. It's an insecticide product for particularly aphid control. We have added to the advisory just due to some uncertainty in the EU market, just on green lentils only. So it's one of those things that, just go talk to your grain buyer ahead of time. If they say it's acceptable, go ahead and use it. But there's maybe certain situations where, it may cause a problem or two, and you may be asked not to use it. Other than that, typical messaging around glyphosate, make sure proper usage and just make aware that there are market acceptance issues. And then finally, glufosinate, just recognizing that glufosinate ammonium is not a desiccant for any crop, really. That's cereals, pulses. Just get that message out there that that's not an option due to MRL marketing concerns.
Mm-hmm. Now, and that is something when you go through the list, some of these things it's very clear that this is not something, that you should use at all. And then there are other ones that, as you mentioned, it will depend on where that product is going to end up. So as farmers are going through that, what do you recommend they do when they're sort of working their way through the list?
Yeah, so we've tried to split it out into kind of like suggestions or categorizations, and this is where you get into a yellow or red, things like that. The red should be pretty straightforward. It's a simple do not use, like no conversation needed. It's off the table. The yellow is really our balance within the industry to make sure that we are maintaining use of these products that we know are useful for the industry, but really targeting it to only the cases where we know the market access issue exists. So the flunicimid example is a perfect example where, the communications on green lentils only, that's just due to the difference in market classes, a red versus green lentil, where the EU, from a green lentil perspective, is a lot more important than a red lentil going into different export markets. So the recommendation is obviously pay attention to what those recommendations are. And if the communications go talk to your grain buyer, just have that conversation, hopefully early in advance. If they can't get you the answers they need, they'll be able to definitely get back to you with those, by reaching out within the industry too. So.
Mm-hmm. So, good advice. Obviously, you talk to your buyer. Make sure that you're working with your agronomist if you're working with an agronomist on some of these decisions as well, because certainly for many of these products, I would assume there is an alternative, or it is a management practice you may have to change well ahead of time to manage for not having access to a product. So that might bring up a lot of questions, and that is one thing I do want to hit on here, Greg, before we wrap up is. You mentioned that there's the alert every year, but there's also a webinar coming up that for those interested could check it out. When is it, and how can people get signed up?
For sure. Yeah, no, we recognize that, maybe this advisory doesn't provide enough information, or maybe there's questions, things like that. So we do offer a webinar to kind of kick this off every growing season to provide that opportunity to get those questions answered. So we do have a product advisory webinar coming up on April 24th. It's at 11 a.m. Central Daylight Time. And you can sign up by going to the Keep It Clean website, keepitclean.ca. And you should be able to see it right on the homepage, the register tab. So definitely encourage you to register for that. And obviously while you're there, sign up for the newsletter so you get it directly in your mailbox too.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Okay. So that's April 24th, 11 a.m. Manitoba time, as we like to call it this time of year. Because It's not Saskatchewan time this time of year.
Not Saskatchewan time.
Anyway, yeah, exactly. Welcome to the prairies. Okay. All right, Greg, thanks so much for joining me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks, Lyndsey.
All right, we'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this. If you're applying a low-rate N stabilizer, you might be falling for a losing strategy. Low-rate products promise great results, but may lack the potency of higher active ingredient concentrations, so great isn't always what you get. Don't put yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvol Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
back to Real Ag Radio. I am your host for this Agronomic Monday, Lyndsey Smith, and a reminder to not put yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvol Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca. All right, we go now to the latest corn school that's been published over on our YouTube channel and, of course, on RealAgriculture.com. We're going to hear from Turner Sanford. This is part 2 of a planter setup series that we did. Bern Tobin, of course, went through the planter, and he and Turner are going to go through the top 5 sort of troubleshooting calls that come in and what to do about them. And of course, as I mentioned, if you are more of a visual learner, head on over to YouTube. You can watch all the video that goes along with it. All right, let's hop to the latest corn school right now.
Turner, you get a lot of calls.
We sure do.
In the spring from growers. You know, we try to get ourselves set to roll, but sometimes it doesn't work out so well. We've got some challenges. You know, what are some of the typical calls you get?
Right. So when I think about our top 5 customer calls, one would be, my CCS hoses are plugging. My seed's not flowing. I've got row units that are overpopulating or underpopulating. Another one is a speed source error. And even more specifically, when we have, say, a green planter matched with a not green tractor, we run into that quite a bit. And then as we get later on into the season, crop changeover. That's always something that we want to make sure that we're doing right. We get more than a handful of calls about crop changeover.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to do a preemptive strike here. We're going to answer these questions right here and right now on the corn school. What do you want to start with?
We'll start with our CCS hoses are plugging. Alrighty. So we're hanging out underneath our CCS tanks, which stand for Central Commodity System. This is going to be the bulk seed storage on our planter. Now, our CCS system consists of a few different components. Obviously, we've got our big yellow tanks. That's where our seed's going to be stored. We've got a manifold down here that have hoses that run to, they've got their own specific row unit that they're going to be assigned to. And then we've got a big fan at the back of the tractor, which is ultimately going to blow the seed from the tank towards our row units. When we think about our CCS hoses plugging, it could be one of many different things. There are different crop types that are permitted to work with CCS and ones that aren't. A common crop that we plant that comes to mind that may have a difficulty being moved by air from our center fill tanks to the outside of our planters was when we talk about large kidney beans. So we would typically see a 3 bushel hopper or 1.6 bushel hoppers being used to plant big, heavy, edible beans. So we've talked about crops that are permitted to work with our CCS. So we think about corn, we think about soybeans, we think about our smaller edible beans, right? Another thing that could cause some plugging would be not enough seed lubricant. So what we suggest, especially if it's a brand new planter and there's never been any seed lubricant through the hoses, is dump a fair amount in the bottom of your CCS tanks. And all you're going to need to do to activate that blower fan to push that seed lubricant out through all the hoses is actually just lower the planter. Your CCS fan's actually tied to a height sensor on your frame, so once it gets to a low enough point, it'll kick that fan on and blow that seed lubricant out through all your main hoses and into the row units, and even lubricate the area inside your seed meters. Another thing that can play a part in our CCS hoses plugging is actually too much fan. We get it often enough that you would think, hey, my seed's not flowing to the row unit, potentially I need more air to push that crop out. When in fact, too much air could actually be causing a log jam. We could have a bundle of seed trapped in the tubes. So one thing to keep in mind is that you could actually have too much fan. A good way to know if you have a blockage, when the planter's unfolded, these will be much easier to come in contact with from the ground. But you can shake these and you'll hear a rattle. If there's airflow, there'll be seed flow. If there is no airflow, so say we've got a hose leak or our row unit's full and doesn't allow any more air into it, we won't have any seed in here. So one thing to note, airflow means seed flow. So another common question we get in the spring from our growers is, why am I receiving a wheel speed air or a speed source error. When we talk about wheel speed error, what it could be is when we look back here on our planter, we have a motion speed sensor here. And if this sensor doesn't recognize that the planter isn't moving, then it won't plant. And what we can see sometimes in no-till conditions or trashy conditions, say a corn leaf or some trash can get bundled up in here and actually block the visibility of the sensor. So if you do have a planter wheel motion error, this would be a good spot to check. When we talk about a speed source error, typically that's a checkbox that was left unchecked or mischecked in the cab. The reason we have a speed source error come up is typically because our tractors actually used to have a radar. And when we plant now, we use a GPS, a simulated radar speed through the GPS beacon on the front of the tractor. The reason we use our receiver speed is that it can actually calculate slip, where our radars weren't smart enough to calculate slip. So say you were traveling at 5 miles an hour, you got some slick conditions, and your wheels were spinning, right? Say you were only actually traveling 4.7. That radar wasn't smart enough to do the slip calculation, tell the variable rate motors or the seed drives that they need to slow down so that you don't overpopulate. When we use our GPS receiver speed, it can calculate that slip and any speed changes in the tractor to ensure that we're going to hit the proper calculation, even if you aren't driving your desired speed. Question or comment 3 that we would typically get is, why am I getting my row unit isn't planting error? Or a comment being, my row unit isn't planting. What could it be? So this is going to kind of piggyback onto our CCS discussion from before. We want to make sure that we are getting seed to the row unit. A good way to check that is, we want to make sure that our delivery hose has good contact with our hopper. We can pop the top off the hopper, look inside the meter to see if seed has made it to the meter. If we've confirmed that seed is flowing through the tubes and have made it to the meter, we would next look at our vacuum. What can happen, often happens, especially with the split row planter changing between corn and soybeans, is that our vacuum hose doesn't have a good seal or doesn't have a good sitting on our row unit. What can happen is if it's loose and you're bouncing through the field, it can pop off. Now you have no vacuum to keep your seed on the plate. Another thing we can check for is in any pinch points or areas where your hose might come in contact, right? We can run our hand along and listen for ear leaks or feel them out. We've got a good solid hose. We don't have any vacuum leaks. From the hose side of things, we can pop our row unit open and make sure that we're not losing vacuum through our meter seal. So whether it's had fallen out, it's got dried up and cracked, improper care of this seal will lead to a loss of vacuum and ultimately the row unit wouldn't plant. So another place we'd look is here on our seal. All right, so common question number 4 or comment number 4 would be, why is my row unit overpopulating or underpopulating? So the previous question we had, my row unit's not working at all. We've identified that we've got seed coming to the mini hopper. We've checked our vacuum hoses. We've ensured that we've got vacuum going to the meter. So what can we do to figure out why we're overpopulating or underpopulating? So first off, we'll pop our meter open and take a look at our seed bowl. One thing to think about is if we don't have enough vacuum, right, we won't be able to hold seed into our bowl holes here. Ultimately, what's going to happen is these seeds will fill up the holes. They ride around the meter. Once they get to here, they get passed off to a brush belt, or in a conventional situation, a seed tube, and it drops down into our seed trench. Opposite to that would be too much vacuum. And what we could see is that we would have a cluster of seeds, or say maybe 2, and we would be dropping double the amount of seeds, ultimately resulting in overpopulation, significantly off of your population target. Now, we've popped this open, we've taken a look, we've identified if we have too much or too little vacuum. What other adjustments can we do if that doesn't fix our issue? So if we pop our seed bowl out, we can take a look in here at what we call our doubles eliminator. So for corn, we're going to have two components. We're going to have this green rumble strip, and it's bumpy. Opposite to this would be a yellow strip. We'd run it in edible beans or soybeans, and it's actually smooth. But the idea of this bumper strip is to actually slow the seeds down from bouncing around in here, let them get picked up and caught onto our bowls, so we're kind of filtering the doubles as they go down. If we still have doubles once they reach up to here, we actually have this mechanism which would knock duplicate seeds out of the holes to ensure that we only have one seed per hole. For corn, we want it set to our middle notch here and adjust as needed. This should get you going with successful results, but different seed sizes or seed weights, ultimately, we may need to see an adjustment done with that. They're just little pinch clips, and you can move it up or down. Alrighty, so our fifth comment or concern that we get towards the end of the season would be, hey, I need a reminder on crop changeover. I know there's components in the cab I need to change over in the display, and there's physical components out on the meter. Can you just run me through it quickly? So when we're changing from corn to soybeans or corn to edible beans, the first thing that we'd want to think about here is changing out our corn bowl. Not to be confused with our soybean bowl, as they look very similar. Our corn bowl has 32 holes. Our soybean bowls have 64 holes. So they look very similar, and the holes have the same spacing actually, but our corn ones are half filled in. If we tried to seed soybeans with this, ultimately we'd end up with about half the rate, and our meters would be really spinning quickly to try and achieve that population because there's half the amount of opportunity to hold seed. So what we could do, so we'll pop out our corn bowl, and the next thing we'd look at in here is our rumble strip. So in corn, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to slow down the seed bouncing around, allow it to get caught by the seed bowl. In soybeans, we actually want to pop this out, and we put in a smooth yellow strip. Now those three prongs on the back of the meter, and you can pop this out and pop your yellow one in. One of the last adjustments we would make inside our ExactEmerge bowl is our doubles eliminator. So as we discussed before, we'd have this set to our middle mark for corn, and in soybeans, we actually want to keep it out of the way. We're not so worried about knocking doubles off in soybeans. Typically, we're seeding at such a high rate anyways. Alrighty, so a couple final thoughts. We've discussed our physical adjustments on the planter outside. When we're talking about in the cab, if you have a SeedStar 2 or a SeedStar XP planter, we want to make sure we go into our seed setup and change our rows from planting to say 16 to 32 or 12 to 24 if you have a split row planter and you're changing to soybeans. The nice thing about doing it in a SeedStar 4 planter or a newer planter such as this is that it's simply easier. We change our crop type, we check a box, and the in-cab portion is complete. So those are our top 5 customer calls we receive in the spring.
Well, that does it for another edition of RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I have been your host, Lyndsey Smith. I will be back Thursday for the Farmer Rapid Fire. Super excited. Looking forward to that. It's one of my favorite shows. Love to check in with so many farmers across Canada. If you've got feedback on today's show, be like Chad. Drop me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com, and let me know if you've got questions, if you've got story ideas, if you want to share your perspective on something that we talked about, just drop me a line. Always glad to hear from you. Of course, you can also call that RealAg feedback line, 1-855-776-6147. I'll be hosting The Agronomist tonight, as always, Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern. You can head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists at 8 p.m. Eastern. Tonight, we're going to talk about terminating cover crops. You can also hop on YouTube, subscribe to the Real Agriculture channel, and it will actually send you a reminder when we're about to go live. Imagine that. All right, everyone have a wonderful Monday. We'll talk to you Thursday. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio episode brought to you by hard-performing carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide hits aphids hard with effective, selective, extended control. It also has activity on lygus and tarnished plant bugs. Ask your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/CA today.